thing really moves, doesn't it? Wow, okay. Okay, so we are actually wrapping up our series today on Be Strong and Courageous. And so it's really exciting. I feel super honored to be able to end this series. I really do feel like God's put a really cool word in my heart. And so I really hope that you are blessed today. I'm going to be sharing about Lazarus. And if you don't know the end of the story, he actually gets risen from the dead. So, spoiler alert. But I have to share that so that all of this makes sense. But now, in our church, I've actually heard stories of people in our church that have physically been brought back to life. There are people who have been in ICU for several weeks on intubators, doctors giving, orders saying there's no brain activity. And now there's people standing here today. They have bypassed death and they have a new life. And similarly, Lazarus from the Bible was also dead, and he was brought back to life. And today we're going to look at that powerful miracle and look at the possibility of us being brought back to life. And what's great about that is that Jesus in the Bible often used physical, real life examples to parallel to spiritual things in our life. It's a way to communicate to us humans plainly. So there's physical death, right? We all know about that. We all have experience with loss and physical death in our lives. But what about spiritual death? Spiritual life is said to be the life lived in and with God. And so spiritual death happens when we haven't given areas in our life over to God yet. And so how does this happen? Our spirit, which, when we believe in Jesus and confess our love for him, it's so connected to the Lord. So how can we actually experience death in our spirit and in those areas? It can happen through our daily worries and our cares. We go through major trials, or there's this constant cultural opposition that we experience just day to day, living in this world, going to the store, living your life. And those things can chip away at our liveliness in our spirit. And also not being connected to the Father, not spending daily time with him can lead to spiritual death. So how do we get back to life, right? It doesn't just end there. Is it possible for a soul to be restored? For those who are so consumed and wrapped up in their sins to actually be brought back to the fullness of God and the life that he has for them? It is true. It's possible. In praying for this message, I did feel really strongly that God wants to bring some areas back to life in some of your lives. Maybe it's for joy. Maybe a lot of you are living just day to day and not feeling God's true joy in your life. Or maybe you're not experiencing God's peace in his fullness in your life. Or maybe some hopes and dreams have died in your life that you think are so far gone, but God wants to bring those back this morning. Or maybe you're just so afraid to give and to tithe your money and to be generous. And those things God wants to bring back to life. Maybe it's your health, your physical or your mental health that needs to be resurrected this morning. Or maybe you have children in your heart, in your life, that aren't walking with the Lord, and you want to see them be brought back and restored. We can have courage this morning to be fully alive, not just mostly alive. We can be fully alive because of the resurrection power Jesus has given us, alive from the inside out. We sang it this morning. God gives us life. He comes to bring hope and to restore. That's what he does. So this morning, we're going to look at the story of Lazarus. And it's an incredible story and worth studying if you can. I'm not able to unwrap everything this morning in every detail. But I encourage you to get into it and read it on your own. See what God wants to speak to you. And we're going to begin in John chapter 11, verse 1 and 2. It says, "Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair." Okay, so we're setting the scene. We've got all the characters there. And I'm going to stop for a second because what's really interesting to me, what stood out to me, I don't know if it does to you, is that this is Mary and Martha. The same Mary and Martha, where Mary was sitting at Jesus' feet, and Martha was super busy in the kitchen trying to prepare a feast and trying to get everything ready for Jesus and his friends and throwing a big fit in front of Jesus. And here, this is how it's recalled. It's not a negative recalling of, Martha's mistakes. It's a positive reflection on what actually happened. It's a description of Mary, and it doesn't recount. And it just reminds me that Jesus does not recount all of our mistakes. He doesn't sit there and go over a list of all the things that we've done wrong. He truly forgives us. And it's shown right here, just in the first 2 verses. And to God, we're not known by our mistakes and our shortcomings. We're known by who he's called us to be and who he made us to be. And so we're going to pick up on verse 3 and 4. It says, "So the sisters sent word to Jesus, 'Lord, the one you love, who is Lazarus, is sick.' When he heard this, Jesus said, 'This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it.'" Okay, very interesting, right? He's saying he's not going to die, but yet God's going to have the glory. And a few times in this chapter, Jesus states it's actually for his glory that all this is happening. And he's saying it right then and there, but they have a hard time understanding it. And glory means to praise and point us to God. And so that means something can happen in our lives that makes us praise and look to God. And that's what's happening here in this story just already. And Jesus was speaking directly to their fears. They didn't have to say it, "Oh God, we're so scared he's going to die." Jesus spoke right then and there. He's not going to die. He spoke right to their fears without them having to say one word about it. And sometimes Jesus will do that in our lives. He'll speak about our fears, but we're too afraid to let go of our fears and to grab the faith. So did the disciples rise up and have courage at this point? You probably guessed it. No, they did not. Let's see how they handled things. In verses 5 and 6, it says, "Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he rushed right over there. He ran there as fast as he could." No, that is not what it says. It said he stayed where he was 2 more days. He was only 2 miles from there, and he stayed where he was for 2 days. So why? Why did he wait? Didn't you just say, Jesus, that he wouldn't die and that's for your glory? Can't you come and heal him? And yet you're just sitting here waiting? The friend that you love and care about is dying, and he chooses to wait. There is so much historical context to why he didn't go right away, but the bottom line is that it was all part of the plan. It was all part of the plan. It was very intentional. And sometimes in our lives, we can perceive God's delay as denial of his love over our lives. And that's just not true. Especially for this case, in Lazarus' case, in his story, God's timing is perfect, and it always will be perfect. And so Jewish culture is very interesting because it plays a big role in this, is that they say that by day 3, someone is pronounced officially dead. So that means that for those 3 days that someone passes away, they believed that the soul had the opportunity to leave the body and then come back to the body, leave and come back. And so they said, okay, by day 3, that no longer is a possibility. And so Jesus was so intentional about this, because he waited until all hope was gone to show up in his glorious power, to show a way like no other, to do what seemed impossible for us. Okay, let's go back to the verses. It says in 11, 12, and 13, it says, he went on, so Jesus went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up. His disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he'll get better. So let's let him sleep. Those disciples are so wise. Can't you see their wisdom right here? Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. Man, if there was ever an acceptable time for Jesus to just kind of put his hand in his head and roll his eyes, that would be this moment right here. Said those disciples, they struggled sometimes, and this was one of those times. Okay, so verse 14, it says, So then he told them plainly, so now they didn't understand the first time. So Jesus is coming back and saying plainly, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. Verse 17, on his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. He died. And then verse 19, it says, now many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. So now it's been 4 days since he passed. And Jesus isn't a slow walker. He's intentional about everything he does. It was so intentional that he showed up on that 4th day. Because remember, he wasn't pronounced dead until day 3. So that means that by day 4, all the friends, all the family, all the neighbors had gathered around to be there to comfort and to mourn with Mary and Martha. That means that there are so many more people to get a front row seat to God's power, more people to see what he's able to do. It wasn't just a small miracle. This was huge. This was massive. And so this timing was exactly what God wanted. This is why he took his time. He wanted to show his glory and power through this purpose. And he wanted to show everyone the power of being brought back to life. I mean, if God could bring a 4-day-old dead man back to life, what could he do for me? What could he do for you? Still, those that were closest to him still didn't even understand what was going on. Full of grief and despair, Mary and Martha were besides themselves. The sisters who loved Jesus immensely went into this being filled with discouragement and hopelessness. And instead, they approached Jesus despairingly. And they say, Lord, Martha said, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Have you ever asked God that question? God, if you had been there, things would be different for me. God, where were you? God, where are you? God, if only you could have prevented this in my life. Mary and Martha say it as if God is unaware of their life and their current situation and their future. As if he doesn't have the power to raise him from the dead, to do the impossible. They are in such disbelief. But does our doubt keep Jesus from relating to us and loving us? Absolutely not. Those walking with Jesus, his disciples, those that he loved the most, weren't perfect, and they didn't have full faith all of the time. Through the disciples, it's important to see that Jesus' unconditional love and power for us isn't dependent on the level of our faith. He just loves us, absolutely loves us. So let's look at Jesus' response to their questioning, to their confusion and their doubt. This is what Jesus says. Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die physically. Whoever lives by believing me will never die spiritually. Do you believe this? Now, resurrection at the time, this was just a word. Nobody had actually seen or experienced a resurrection. Jesus did raise people from the dead. He did that a lot. But this was the first use of this word. And in these two verses, Jesus is making a powerful promise that has transcended and gone beyond just this one miracle of Lazarus. And it's extended for all of eternity. It's been promised to us, to you today, this morning, is that Jesus didn't just have the resurrection power. He didn't just understand all the secrets to it. What he's saying in this verse is that he is the resurrection. To know Jesus is to know resurrection life. If you know him, you have complete possibility of being brought back to life. By believing in Jesus, we have the same power that raised him from the dead living inside of us. Do you believe this? Do you believe this for your life and for those around you? Can you be brought back to life? Can the areas that we mentioned at the beginning, Can you see God's healing and restoration in those? Today you can find strength in surrendering your life to Jesus because he sacrificed everything for you to have life. You can believe in the resurrection power for your life. You can set aside all your doubts and your fears and your questions, and you can believe Jesus wants to bring you back to life. And we're going to finish out this story and see what happens. It says in verse 38 and 39, Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, "the sister of the dead man, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." In the King James Version, it says that he stinketh. So if you ever want to read that one. And then in verse 40, it says, "Then Jesus said, 'Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?'" Okay, again, Jesus has to reassure his disciples the promise that he made. Again, did I not tell you? Now, I'm a mom, I have kids, and I can feel the rise of frustration. Did I not already tell you? I told you, eat your eggs. Get your shoes on, we have to go. Did I already tell you? And that's how I would feel. I'd feel very impatient, but that is not how Jesus, I'm sure that's not how he actually felt. He's incredibly kind and patient. And so let's look at verse 41 and 42. It says, "So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, 'Father, I thank you that you've heard me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me.'" Remember, at this time, there's a huge crowd there. And then in verse 43 and 44, it says, "When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, 'Lazarus, come out!' The dead man came out, and his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, 'Take off the grave clothes and let him go.'" What an incredible miracle. Lazarus was dead, really dead, and now he's walking out of his tomb. And everything in these verses, in this story, is so important, and it points to the fact that it actually takes community to see life restored. Yes, Jesus calls out life in us, but it takes the community around us to see people brought back to fullness of life. It takes that courage in community. So you're here today, and maybe you don't feel like you're brought back to life in all the areas you want to be. So what can you do? You can find courage and community here. There's a lie that people believe, maybe not you, but there's some people that believe that you have to be healed and whole, and that your whole life has to be put back together and in order for you to be used by God. And if we look at this story, God used a dead man. At least you have breath in your lungs. At least you decided to come here this morning. God can use you. You play a vital role in this community. And it's very important for you to be a part of community. After Jesus performed this miracle for Lazarus, it took the strength and the courage of his community to bring him back to life. If we look back at the key players in Lazarus' resurrection, we'll see it took the whole community that was there. And Jesus obviously did it in front of a crowd, but it wasn't to shame anybody. It was actually for a greater impact and a greater unity in the community. And so let's take a look at the different roles. First, we're going to look at the crowd. We have the crowd in the story. Some of you are just the crowd in other people's lives. Maybe you're not close enough to know all the details like Mary and Martha did, but you're just watching and you're observing. All the while, your faith increases. You get to see miracles happen. And you get to see God's love and restoration be brought back, and that just increases your faith. And the crowd is necessary so that we can mutually encourage and build each other up. Let your light shine, right? And then we have those who run for help, okay? So if someone is hurt, bleeding out, we're going to call an ambulance, right? We're not going to try to jump on there and solve it ourselves. I mean, if we have all the tools necessary. But when someone's hurt, we call an ambulance. We run for help. Those that knew Lazarus and knew his condition, his sisters, they ran for help. And they knew the details of his life and his sickness, so they knew where to go. You might be in that same position. You might be called to bring someone in your life to Jesus. Now, maybe you can't physically bring them to church, but you can pray. You can share his love and his hope for them. Some of you are called to bring those who are spiritually dead back to life. There is nothing that keeps you from praying for them. You can bring their needs and their areas to Jesus. I know some of you here are praying for restored relationships with your children, and this is possible if you bring them to Jesus. Don't give up on praying for them and running to the greatest restorer. Then we have people who rolled away the stone. Those people were close and strong enough to roll away the heavy stone. There might be practical obstacles that prevent others from seeing life. As believers, we're called to roll away stones in other people's lives. Some heavy stones, like practical needs, like listening to someone, giving money, lending cars. That's something our church is amazing at, is seeing a need and helping out, rolling the stone away so that people can see and find life. I see people giving money and cars and food and helping each other move. That's all part of community, and that comes from being around each other. We carry each other's burdens. That's what we're called and meant to do. This is when it gets really good. So then we have the people who were there closest to Jesus. After Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, he commanded people to take off his grave clothes, unwrap his arms and his legs and body. The Bible isn't clear about exactly who did that, because it was a stinky job. But honestly, it really doesn't matter, because whoever was just close enough just jumped right in to do it. And so those that are closest to someone are there for a purpose. They're there for a reason. Some of us need to be willing to get close enough to someone else's messiness, to the stench, to the deathly parts of their life, and to unwrap the grave cloths for them. We have to be willing to do that, to help someone else see that there is hope and that there is life. No matter where you're at in your own life, you can have courage to enter into other people's lives, into their messiness. What kind of life will they see? How can you bring someone hope? Imagine what we'll see looking around here on a Sunday morning, bringing all of our stinky friends back from the grave, sitting here. Imagine what that will be like. But likewise, we also need to allow other people in. You have to allow people into the smelly, gross, and ugly parts of your life, into the dead areas. You have to be willing to let people just unwrap the grave clothes for you. You could be in a cave, isolated and alone, wrapped up and consumed in all your mistakes and your shortcomings and your depression, trying to hide the smell. But what if you allow the community that God's put around you to begin to unwrap you? You could have life again, restored completely. What if you allowed others to roll the heavy stones so that you could see life? What's interesting is that needing help isn't necessarily a sign of defeat. It's a sign of weakness, which is great. You want to hear that, right? A sign of your humanness. You can ask him for help, and he'll most likely put people in your life to help you. That's what's incredible about community. And don't just give up because you can't do it alone. You're not meant to. And we see Jesus' life. He took the most courageous step towards community, towards bringing us back to life. Jesus knew that his decision to raise Lazarus from the dead would actually be the beginning stages of his crucifixion, which shows me that if you let people into your life to see the miracles of your life, then miracles can happen in other people's lives. That's just the way that it works. Now, this whole story has reminded me this week of just Some of my friends, I have some special friends, every Tuesday they go to this place called the Goodwill Bins. And it's this magical place where you find all these leftover items that Goodwill never wanted. They couldn't sell, so it goes to this place, right? And they put all this stuff in the bins, and then there's all these people. It's really fun to watch. All these people crowded around the bins, and then the workers say, okay, 3, 2, 1, go. And everyone runs, and they're going through the bins, and they're trying to find treasures. They're trying to find things that they want to bring back to life. They're trying to find things of value. Now, what if we had people like that in our lives that are just running to try to find the treasure and the goodness and the things to be restored in our lives, the valuable things? We need people like that in our lives to dig through and sort through the messiness, to sort through the junk, and to help us find healing and restoration and life. Those are the types of friends that we need, the community that we need around us. God's resurrection and his power is bigger and greater than any other dead areas of your life. There is always hope, even when it seems that all is lost and broken. Maybe you feel like one of those items at the Goodwill today, just waiting to be picked up and restored. And restoration is here today. And you can have courage in the community that God's placed in your life to bring you back to life. So before we end, we're going to take a few minutes. I'm going to have Maverick and Leah May help me. They're going to pass out a strip of cloth to you. Don't worry, these are new, fresh and clean. They're not from Lazarus. But, no, right there. Those ones right there. They're going to pass out one to everybody, and what you're going to do is you're going to take just a couple minutes to reflect on what we talked about this morning. I know that God is faithful. I know that he speaks. I know that you guys can hear his voice. And so, Matt, you can come on up. And so just take a minute to write down. There are some couple ideas on the screen. If there's an area in your life that you feel like God wants to bring back to life, write it on the strip of cloth. Or if you feel like there's someone in your life that needs to hear and experience Jesus' resurrection power for the life, write their name on there. So just take a couple minutes to write that down, and then I'll come back up for another instruction. Okay, as you're finishing up writing on your cloth, we're going to do something super courageous here this morning, and this is why I didn't give you part 2 yet. What we're going to do is we're going to gather into our prayer huddle groups. So find a group of about 4 to 5 people, and you're going to pray over your cloth, and then when you're done, you're going to exchange that with someone. You're going to take theirs, and you're going to give them yours. And you're going to commit to praying for someone else's needs this week. I know it's super courageous. I'm sure some of you guys were very vulnerable, but you're going to exchange this with someone, and they're going to pray for you this week. So we can gather into prayer huddles now. You don't have time to throw away your cloth.